Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 18 of Fracking Nightmare. And still, the UK is frack-free, and I'm hoping that we get through 2014, and certainly if we get into 2015, I think there's a very good chance that we can keep this country frack-free, because I don't think that any party supporting fracking is going to stand too much chance in the UK elections. Now, we are clearly having impact, because just last week, Manchester police have a counter-terrorism unit. No surprise there. It would be rather remiss of them if they didn't. But one of their counter-terrorism instructors was conducting a workshop, and without anyone soliciting any comment, she made reference to the Barton Moss camp and made the allegation that the people at Barton Moss were borderline economic terrorists. Now, I doubt very much whether this particular instructor has ever been near Barton Moss. Probably doesn't even know where it is. And that's not her view. This is clearly the reframed perception being passed down to be put out through the training courses. Now, my feedback is that that comment was not allowed to pass without a reaction. And there were a number of people in the room who questioned her on her observation. And later on in the session, she was actually repeating the statement and said that the people at Barton Moss were borderline extremists. Now, this is completely outrageous, because the Barton Moss campaign has been running for 3 months, and there is not a single piece of video evidence to support any suggestion that the people at Barton Moss are either economic terrorists or borderline extremists. They are people that have done their research and come to their own realization that this fracking nightmare, this abomination, is not something that can be permitted in this country. And later on in the show, we're going to be talking to Brian Monk, a farmer from Queensland, in Southern Queensland in Australia, and he's going to be sharing with us his experiences of having to live above the gas fields. And it's an identical situation to that potentially at Barton Moss, where the company say they are exploiting the coal bed methane, or coal seam gas as it's called in Australia. Now, this particular instructor also made the observation that it was believed, of course she didn't say by whom, but this is clearly the information she is being passed, that there are no more than 15 people at Barton Moss camp who are anti-fracking, and the rest are there looking for a scrap. Now, this, of course, is completely in line with the fallacious reports being put out by Peter Fahey, the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, and their PR department. Now, talking of PR departments, about 10 days ago, the BBC sent David Guest, one of their senior reporters, down to Barton Moss to investigate the allegations of police brutality. So let's just have a look at what happened as David Guest was leaving Barton Moss, having conducted his in-depth investigation into allegations of police brutality.
See you, it's been a pleasure.
Now, I actually saw the David Guest report on BBC before I saw that piece of video footage. And so my assumption was that David Guest was probably handing himself in. He probably went up to the police officer and said, "You need to arrest me because I am guilty of the most heinous crime of fully biased reporting. And therefore I need you to take me into custody." But of course, in reality, the British Bullshit Corporation had sent down David Guest with a police escort to do an unbiased report on police brutality at Barton Moss. I mean, this is completely outrageous. Chief Superintendent Mark Roberts, of course, continues to put out his allegations that the protectors at Barton Moss are there to incite trouble with the police. Well, compare David Guest's treatment by the police, where he's given a lift home basically, to this. And this is what occurred last Friday afternoon when I was at Barton Moss. Can we bring up the picture there, please, Mike? Yep. There we go. And so after 3 months, or a little more than 3 months at Barton Moss, I had the unique experience on Friday at the hands of the TAU. Now, initially, I wasn't sure whether this was some obscure sort of greeting from the TAU or even some mating ritual. But either way, for the first time in 3 months, the TAU decided that they would actually lay their hands on me. And I will show you the video footage next week, but meanwhile, it's in the hands of the lawyers at the National Union of Journalists, who are taking a look to see whether or not what actually transpired does indeed constitute an assault. Now, I'm not sure why it wasn't followed through, but as you can see from this picture, I reacted rather strangely because when the TAU officer, and we'll identify him in a second, decided to readjust my clothing for me, I just laughed. I thought, this is completely outrageous. I've been filming for 3 months. I do my level best to stay out of their way, but this was just outrageous, aggressive policing. But of course, we've become accustomed to this from the TAU. So let's see who it was now, just to name, and I don't think there's any shame. I don't think these guys are capable of that. They're not capable of very much other than outright thuggery, which is why, of course, they have the moniker TAU, Thugs Are Us. So, Officer 12643, welcome to the unique club of those who have actually deemed it appropriate to lay their hands on me. Well, the behaviour of the TAU after a lock-on. Now, the lock-on came about because the Greater Manchester Police decided that they would walk the trucks into the IGAS camp in a record 11 minutes. So clearly there was going to be a reaction, and there was indeed a reaction. There was a lock-on, causing a delay of a couple of hours, which of course gave the TAU all the excuse they needed to be unleashed from the vans where they're kept in their cages and put onto the front line, which is when they decided that they would push me out of the way, push me into a bush. But a little further down the road, they decided that they were going to get an arrest. And I want you to watch this because I hope you can hear what is being said here, because the guy being arrested is clearly saying, I am not resisting, I am not resisting. He's standing calmly with his hands behind his back while he is being handcuffed, which, by the way, is totally inappropriate at a peaceful demonstration. But you can hear the TAU officer saying, stop resisting, stop resisting. These guys, they have a script, and it doesn't matter what is going on, they will follow their script. So take a look at this.
I'm not squaring up to it. I'm walking. Take your hand.
Look at that! Right, you are under arrest. Are you going to get handcuffed? Move it forward, please. Put your hand behind your back. Move it. Look, I'm not resisting in any way. Put your hand behind your back. Put your hand behind your back. I can't. Put it behind. Why? I'm not resisting in any way. It was clearly seen. Go below you on the wrist there, mate. Clearly not resisted in any way. He assaulted me several times. Right, come on.
So what you saw there was TAU, Thugs Are Us, Officer 18610, and he's clearly going for gold. He's going for the Gold Commendation Medal for the most arrests at a peaceful protest. So I think he's way ahead of the curve there. Of course, most of the arrests up until the court ruling that Barton Moss Road is a footpath were for obstructing the highway, but the police have retrospectively changed those charges from obstructing the highway to obstructing a police officer. Now that it is ruled as a public footpath, the charges have been changed to aggravated trespass. So it's going to be interesting to see how that one plays out, because as you can see, the only aggravation is actually coming from the TAU. And you know, we need to understand that this is what we're going to see more and more of as the British government sends word down the chain of command that those people who have done their research, have looked at the irrefutable evidence everywhere else in the world and come to the determination that there is absolutely no way that this process should be unleashed beneath this densely populated island of ours, but they are economic terrorists. Yet, if, and it's a very big if this industry gets ahead, goes ahead, and I believe it won't, but if it goes ahead and the water becomes contaminated, then every single one of those officers in the footage from Barton Moss and from Balcombe and probably from Sutton cum Lound and anywhere else where the motherfrackers try and get their bits in the ground, ultimately they will be culpable for whatever results from this process. Now, in a few days, the Barton Moss community are back in the civil courts as Peel Holdings try and seek an eviction of the camp. Now, the camp has been there for nearly 4 months since the first tents arrived, and 3 months since the iGas operation started. And it's only now that Peel Holdings are trying to evict the camp, and that's under instruction, of course, from iGas, who are experiencing the inevitable delays caused by the protection community. So in the civil courts on Thursday, iGas will be Peel Holdings, on behalf of iGas, will be contesting that the camp should be evicted. Now, there's a lot of information in the public domain about Peel Holdings and the head of the company, John Whittaker, and previously it's been a company that likes to keep itself in the shadows. And when you actually look at a lot of the information, like this report here on Peel and the Liverpool City region, and I urge you to go search this report. It's 200 odd pages, but some of the comments in this report are extremely interesting. And we see that the management team of Peel actually have a very casual relationship with integrity. They work on the basis that they have extremely deep pockets and that they can take on pretty much anyone who dares to get in their way, whether it's another business, whether it's individuals, whether it's local authorities. And this report lays that bare. Now, we don't have the time this evening to go through this, but next week, after the court hearing, then I'm sure we will have some very interesting excerpts to be able to show. So the community and some of the individuals in the camp community have stepped forward to be named defendants. And one of those named defendants is somebody called Ian R. Crane. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? We're doing it because we have done our research and we want to try and find ways in which we can stimulate the curiosity in others. And when the camp first arrived in Greater Manchester, it was very clear that the level of awareness of the process that iGas want to perpetrate beneath that population was rather scant. And the camp has been a catalyst, and anti-fracking groups have now sprung up all around the Greater Manchester area because these people have either done their research or they've been down to the camp and they've spoken to people at the camp. Now, after the first deposition was given to the camp and Peel Holdings tried or are in the process of trying to evict the camp, a number of local people came forward and said, we want to help you. We want to help you because we know that the camp has been absolutely catalytic in helping to raise awareness of this process. So despite the inconvenience to some of the people in the community because of the delays caused by the convoys, we want the camp to remain there. And many of those letters will be included in the submissions to the court this coming Thursday. Now, there is one particular letter that was received from a family who actually live on the Moss. And in fact, they have to drive past the iGas well site to get to their place of residence, which also happens to be their place of business. Now, initially, this family was a little bit concerned and upset by the arrival of the camp and the disruption that it caused to their routine. But as time has gone on, they've had a bit of a change of heart. And I just want to read an extract from the letter that this family has submitted. And I will tell you why in just a second, why it is that I relate to this very much. This is not the whole letter. The first part of the letter accepts that initially they were supportive of iGas and were a little bit concerned about the arrival of the camp. These people also participated in the iGas community liaison meetings, where of course iGas for the last 2.5 years has put forward their sanitised version of what their plans are. The letter reads, "Our monthly community liaison meetings continued. More issues were raised and we expressed our concerns with regard to the impact upon our livelihood. Police were blocking the routes to our homes and our business. Our cars became damaged as we tried to pass large numbers of police vans parked on the road, leaving little space to pass. Our customers and our family were being stopped by the police, asking where they were going and if they wanted to give statements. We were like prisoners in our own home. We were angry towards the whole area. Our lives were having to be planned around the daily activities of iGas, the police and the protesters. One journey home in the evening, our young son asked, 'Mummy, is the Wizard of Oz castle going to crack the earth? And if they crack it, will we all die?' This broke our heart. He had seen the illuminated drill on the iGas well site as a castle. For 2 nights, he was up asking the same question and asking if everything was going to be all right. A preschool boy has been worrying what he was having to see every time we left home. My husband and I decided to do some research. The dangers of what can happen was a complete shock. The threat to our health, our livestock, the landscape, the environment, and the future impact it would have on our livelihood. So that brings me to say, we thank the camp. Through their peaceful protest, they have raised our awareness massively. We have to appreciate our resources and protect our future. Without the dedication from the camp and their persistence through wind, rain and storms, we would never have been made aware of what is really going on around us. We strongly feel that you should allow the peaceful protest to stay until the end of the drilling period and the completion of the iGas operation. We, as neighbourhood residents, need the support of the camp to help raise the community awareness and give them the freedom to form their own views. I wish the camp good luck." And that's one of the letters that will be submitted to the judge on Thursday. The reason that resonates with me is because I was about the same age as this young boy when the Cuban Missile Crisis was unfolding in the UK. And all I can remember was adults all around me talking about the country going into another war, but how this war was going to be far worse than anything we'd ever experienced before because it was going to be nuclear. This is another war. It's a chemical warfare attack on the population of this country. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to meet with Brian Monk from Queensland, Australia.
"60% of the English countryside is under threat from fracking, a process which has transformed the landscape in many parts of the United States and Australia and contaminated the drinking water and air with highly toxic chemicals and gases.
1 in 3 hydraulic fracturing was using a carcinogen. So it really is a chemical cocktail that goes into the earth, of which up to 40% remains there.
The grandchildren were in the bath and they started screaming and everything that was in the water was burnt.
The MDs have been instructed not to report any negative health effects that they believe to be associated with living over a gas field.
There's nothing inherent about the shale gas process that is going to lead to problems.
Some of this material was actually taken to a large sewage treatment works, which had no capacity to handle radioactive materials of this kind.
800,000 gallons was dumped into the Manchester Ship Canal.
50 seismic events were recorded during just 6 fracking treatments.
What is the minimum depth that the fracking will fracture?
We can't tell you until we drill the exploration.
Have you no idea whatsoever? Because it doesn't look like you've done your research.
Shale gases are the future and we will make it happen.
We are just numbers and we are sat on this rich vein of gas, and they will do and say anything to get that gas out of the ground.
It's up to right, there you go, live TV. Got a technical issue here. We've got a connector that's making it a bit difficult for me to hear with Brian. Brian, can you hear me?
I can hear you very well.
Okay, I think if I keep my hand on this connector, it might hold in place. So, Brian, were you listening to the first part of the show there?
Yes, I was. I was actually crying about that letter.
Well, you know, I must confess that the first time I read it was after the lady concerned brought it to my caravan there on the site. And I must confess that, you know, a tear came to my eye because, like I said, you know, I absolutely relate to how that young lad feels because it's very reminiscent to me and the Cuban Missile Crisis back in the early 60s. Now, you have been living with this industry now for nearly 6 years, I think.
Yeah, probably a little bit longer, really, but in earnest for the last 6 years, yeah.
So, Brian, I mean, obviously here in the UK, we're in a very, very different situation than you guys in Southern Queensland. So what counsel would you offer to the people of the UK who are still in a situation where we have only had the one high-volume, high-pressure hydraulic frac conducted nearly 3 years ago now, which led to the 2 seismic events. But at the moment, we've got 64% of the country up for grabs and a move by a number of companies to start exploratory drilling this year. What would your counsel be?
My counsel would be to not let one drill rig successfully drill a hole anywhere in your country. You're a highly populated area, and I can't imagine how you can possibly live with this and not suffer severe health issues.
Now, the population density of the UK is actually 100 times that of Queensland, and of course, actually, parts of Queensland are very, very thinly populated. But maybe give us some insights from your experience. I mean, you're a lot less thinly populated, but what has been the impact of the gas industry in your communities?
If I speak about us first, the gas industry came on and they had all the legislative rights that you can imagine. They could basically, or they said they could do anything they liked. Of course, legislation and law are two very different things.
Indeed.
And because we've refused to allow them to come onto our property, because we've refused to allow that deception to occur, and have never agreed, they are not on our property. And ours was meant to be the first well drilled up this end of Jamet Field, and they've never got that well drilled. So if you imagine, I live on a property where now the nearest gas well that they could drill is the other side of our boundary, and it is about 1.5 kilometres, something like that, might be 1.3 kilometres. I've never actually measured it, away. And the nearest fracked well to us is 3.5 kilometres away, yet that fracked well fracked into, deliberately I might add, BG Group,
Gas.
which is British Gas. They made a commercial decision to deliberately frack into the formation that our water bore sits in, and that's 3.5 kilometres away. But of course, in Africa, they found that the frack fluids can travel far further. I think one of them's 18 kilometres, is it, or something like that? So people need to understand that I probably live on nearly one of your counties. We've got 5,000 acres, and we've got one family in the middle of 5,000 acres, and we're impacted from 3.5 kilometres away, and the airbornes that have fallen into our rainwater tank. Do you guys have rainwater tanks over there?
No, or some people do. They'll use them for their allotments or for the garden, but we don't rely on the rainwater tanks.
Okay, well, out here we have to, and our rainwater tank is a brand new rainwater tank. The roof that the water runs off is a brand new roof. The guttering is brand new, and the downpipe's brand new. Our rainwater tank, and as I said, we're kilometres from the nearest, maybe 15 kilometres from the nearest processing plant, but our rainwater tank is full of radioactive material, gas field chemicals, and gas field like acid rain. We're kilometres away, like where it's affecting one family where I live, like my son and daughter-in-law and my wife and all our grandchildren. It affects that where I live. But in your area, it's going to affect hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of people from the airborne contaminants. So from my point of view, it affects me. And so I'm one voice out here yelling and screaming in a very large area. You will be thousands of people impacted as soon as this industry unleashes, because it doesn't unleash as one gas well. They come in and they say, we're going to do an exploration well. That is rubbish. There's no exploration going on. They know the gas is there. They're coming to get it. You either stop them or you live a horrendous life, because, and it won't be one family, it'll be thousands of families. And then getting back to the community at large, they've got these massive holding ponds right next door to residential estates. They've got compressor stations. I mean, you have a compressor station every 7 kilometres or so. You have a processing plant every 15 kilometres or so. Well, that's our experience. I don't know whether that's universal across the world. And these things, we've got a thing called the National Pollution Inventory, and that inventory shows that the that the industry is pumping thousands of tonnes, and when I say thousands of tonnes, I mean thousands of tonnes of chemicals into the air, and it hasn't started export production yet.
Yeah, this is, I mean, I think it's about 5,500 wells or so that have been drilled in an area actually about the size of the UK in southern Queensland in the space of, what, 5.5, 6 years?
Yes, yeah, and it's really now just starting to ramp up. The gas field that we live in, they've just decided to drill it out. So we've had 10 drill rigs going constantly, and people need to understand that every gas well must be connected to every other gas well, which must be connected to every other gas well, which must be connected to compressor stations and processing plants. Our area is now an industrial area, but in our case, they've been able to, because they've started with the low fruit, you know, the easy to get gas, and where there's a very tiny population, but the destruction that they do is beyond belief. Like in a time when food and water will become the most important things in the world, and clean air, they just are destroying everything. It's like a rollout. It is like a war. We always say it's like a war, and the people that we're fighting wear multicoloured, high visibility uniforms, which I guess they would do over there as well.
Absolutely. And by the way, I just want to put in a comment here, because you know, I've done a series of talks in the Manchester area, obviously, over the last few weeks. And one of the comments that the industry is putting out is that, well, you don't have to worry about your water in Manchester, because we pipe the water into Manchester from the Lake District, which is about, give or take, about 100, 120 miles away or so. But, you know, of course, what people forget is that the water in the Lake District is actually the precipitation that has come from the evaporation elsewhere. And so if the groundwater is contaminated, that groundwater will evaporate, that goes up into the clouds, and it'll eventually be deposited in an area like the Lake District, therefore contaminating the water that's eventually pumped from the Thirlmere area in the Lake District down into Manchester. You know, so the arguments that the industry uses to try and get around what it knows is going to occur are so trite as almost to be embarrassing. But I'm sure you've heard exactly the same lies and deceit from the gas companies in Australia.
Yeah, look, one of the most amazing things that I've seen out here, which to this day still blows me away, the stupidity of it, the Condamine River, which is in the headwaters of our Murray-Darling river network, which is our largest river network, that does irrigation right through the centre, or, you know, right through the edge of Australia, really. It bubbles. It bubbles gas. It bubbles gas. So the thing that they could have done was said, oh, golly, those gas wells that you drilled right next to this river, I mean, within a couple of kilometres probably, have obviously somehow fractured into the riverbed. And they could have said that, but of course they didn't say that. What they said was, well, that gas was possibly naturally occurring. We've got to do a government report to be sure that that gas was not naturally occurring. So 2 years goes by, and, well, actually the first year went by, and then they said, well, this was thermogenic gas, so yes, it's definitely
deep gas.
Deep gas. It's definitely related to the coal bed methane. They admit that now. The government does. They don't admit that it was Origin Energy and ConocoPhillips who drilled the gas wells right next to it that caused it, because, of course, that's how the industry works. It's like BP's Deepwater Horizon gas well, oil well. You know, it's always someone else's fault, isn't it? And really, it might not be. Josh Fox put together a mini documentary called The Sky is Pink. And it is an embarrassment that people believe the sky is pink. If you haven't seen the video, it's worth a look. Because what they say is, well, everyone knows that the sky is blue, but there appears to be a pink tinge. That's what they said about our river. They said, well, that's gas, but, it might not be caused because of drilling. Well, it's never bubbled there, like the owners on both sides have stated clearly. The government have told me that the owners of the property on each side of the bubbling have said it never bubbled there before. And the government and the companies admit that there are 6 bubbling events, and that's at the start of the development of a gas field. This is the start of the development. They haven't even started to de-water and depressurize the aquifers. The gas will be, it comes out of our ground. I don't know if you've ever seen that. You have?
Yeah, I've shown that video before on episode 2. If people want to see some of the videos that we're talking about here, if they go to episode 2 of Fracking Nightmare, we show the videos of the Condamine River and of the gas coming out of your soil.
Yeah, I know. It's just amazing. And you were talking about the spin that they use. The APIA, that's our Australian. Anyway, it's the body that spins the gas industry in Australia. What they said was, well, of course it comes out of the ground. How do you think we find gas fields? And it blew me away. It's like, that is brilliant. That is spin that anyone that does no research would believe. Well, of course it must come out. How did they find the gas field in the first place? Well, they found the gas field, of course, because they drilled a water bore and there was gas in it.
Yep.
No, actually, they found the gas field because they were looking for oil all over Australia. There's something like 13,000, I think it is, abandoned exploration wells out this way, and it's mind-boggling. But the spin, which is what you're talking about, I call it spin. I call it lots of other things when I'm on a Facebook rant, but people believe it because they don't research it. If you want to know about how dangerous the gas industry is, turn on your TV, get onto your internet, and do 5 minutes research. Just health impacts in gas fields, or health impacts on fracking, water contamination. Do anything. It doesn't matter what you do. And then turn on this thing in your head called common sense instead of the thing that you watch, which is called the television. Turn on the thing in your head that says that's got the common sense button on it, right? And think about it. You pump millions of litres of contaminated, toxic crap into the ground, and it's not going to affect you. There's hundreds of earthquakes that have been caused all over. Probably it wouldn't be hundreds, it's thousands of earthquakes caused in the US now by fracking, caused in Italy by fracking. I mean, come on, people. Use some common sense here. Just use your brain for a change. Turn the telly off. I don't care what the BBC's telling you. We had an ABC reporter film a police officer jamming his knee into the back of the head of a non-violent protester. Did the ABC, our ABC's the equivalent of your BBC, did they ever show that on TV? No, I know.
Hey Brian, I recorded an interview with ABC on Barton Moss a few weeks ago, and of course I was referencing what was going on in Australia, and I said that a key element of our process of trying to encourage people to look at this was to get them to look at what has been happening in Southern Queensland, and I referenced yourself and your experience. Did any of that get broadcast? Of course not. A bit too close to home, huh?
Exactly. It's interesting. One of my friends who's been very badly impacted over in the residential estates did an interview with Channel 9 over here, which, is quite a mainstream media outlet. And she talked about all of the people that were impacted, the 29 families. She talked about, and this is in one little pocket, a residential estate, one residential estate of properties between, around 30 acres. There were 29 families impacted. And she talked all about that and the health impacts, blood noses, skin rashes, epilepsy, neurological damage. She talks all about that. And excuse me, and what they put up on TV was one mother believes that the gas industry has caused nosebleeds in her family. No mention of all the rest of them. None of that. No mention about the pollution. Nothing at all. It's like, well, we know the media is run by the people that want to ruin our world, and they pluck the eyes out of it. Yeah, we've had some very interesting media encounters out here ourselves, and if you ever do a good media interview, you can pretty much be sure it's never going to hit mainstream TV.
Now, Brian, actually, the last time that you were on episode 2, and you became a little bit emotional towards the end of part 2 because of your 4-year-old grandson. How is his health these days?
He has lived too long. You shouldn't talk to me about this, Ian.
Sorry, mate.
Yeah, he's not well. He truly isn't well. You know.
I mean, that's why this letter from the lady on the moss. I mean, you know, she literally can see the rig from her house. It's lit up like a castle, the Castle of Oz, as the young lad referred to it. And I mean, I hope she's listening. If she's not listening or watching this evening, then, I mean, forgive me, Brian, but I'm going to encourage her to watch this, because this is what is so important for people to understand. That, you know, they will spin this. They will tell you it's safe. They will tell you that we have robust regulatory control. And as I've said many times, the moment that you hear the word robust, you know they're lying. You know that they have no control. And the reality is that geology does not react to legislative control anyway. So it's absolutely critical that, as Brian says, people do their own research. Brian, your water supply on the farm today, is that still contaminated?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's actually worse. But, you know, the government won't even come out and check it now. But I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to tell people a really simple thing. Our water bore was not a water bore that you could drink from. The cattle did. They liked it. My neighbour used to drink from it and reckoned it was fine. I wouldn't, because it was too salty for me. But all of our livestock relied on that water, and we used to shower in it, wash our dishes in it, wash our clothes in it, etc. But obviously it had a salt content. But the interesting thing is it changed. When they fracked the bore, which we didn't know that they fracked that well next door at the time, but now on hindsight's a great thing, we now know that they fracked the bore. It caused an explosion in our water bore. So the gas well, when they fracked it, Halliburton fracked it. They clearly knew that they had problems with it. There's data. The government has all the data about the problems that they had. They got more water back out of it than what they expected. It took more cement. It was just a disaster. It was a deliberate decision to frack into our into the formation that our water bore sits in. But here's the amazing thing. We heard the explosion. We took, you know, the water bore still worked. We didn't take any notice. A while after, it then became contaminated and it burnt the kid's skin, right? So with that, we, and literally you couldn't put it on your skin. It burnt your skin, literally. Burnt you. So we ring up the government department, the LNG enforcement unit. So it is the department that is meant to supervise this stuff. There was a fellow called Andrew Breyer that ran that department, and he put us in contact with a fellow called Ian Heiner, who became our case manager. Andrew Breyer went to work for Santos soon after. Santos is a major gas exploration and company in Australia.
Revolving door policy.
Revolving door policy. But then, so Ian Heiner then sent out the gas inspectors, the most senior, I've said this before, it'll be on videos everywhere, the senior gas inspector, the principal gas inspector, the regional gas inspector. The principal gas inspector his name was Ray Watt. They came out and they said there is no gas in your bore and it is safe to use. Right? There is no gas in your bore and it's safe to use. They sent me, Matheson, the chief gas inspector, sent me a letter to say there are no hydrocarbons in your water bore and it's safe to use it in its current configuration, which is an ironic way of putting it. But so the thing that's amazing about that, though, is that when Ian Heiner came out to do the water testing on that water bore, he watched us ignite the bore. When the gas inspectors drove out of the driveway on camera, and when you get the chance to watch the Frackman movie, if it ever gets released, you will see that footage. As they are driving away, the camera pans from them to a water bore that ignites. Now, if you think that that's robust regulation, I would love to know how anyone thinks you are protected. If you think the government will look after you, you are done. Because we live a living hell now. My son is decking out a bus at the moment. Yeah, as a motorhome. Yeah, to leave. Sorry, Ian.
I mean, Brian, listen, you, my friend, are a true warrior. You know, you have stayed there to fight the gas companies. And when in the last time we spoke on episode 2, I asked you the direct question. I said, why don't you leave? And you made it very clear that you're not going to run away from this fight. You're going to stand your ground, and you can do whatever it takes to stop this industry from destroying the rest of the country. People of the UK, what does it take? You know, many people in Queensland said, why didn't the people of the US come over to Australia to tell us about their experience? They did, but people weren't listening. Well, why is it in this country that we're finding it so difficult to comprehend the irrefutable evidence from all around the world, from every location where this abomination has been unleashed beneath communities? What is it about the people in the high-vis jackets that prevent them from seeing the damage that this industry causes, and yet they walk the trucks in there following orders as though they want to get this process started, that they want the water, the soil and the air of this country to become toxic, that they want to condemn future generations to lives of absolute abject misery. What are we doing? This program is getting out to, according to YouTube, a little over 2,000 people a week. You know, when I do a public event, I was in Chorlton last week, we had about 120 or so in the room, which was actually a pretty good turnout. I'm going to be in Walkden and Worsley, just 3 miles away from Barton Moss next week on the 12th of March. What is it that we have to do to get people to realise that this isn't conspiracy? This isn't about economic terrorism. This is about preventing socio-psychopaths from unleashing irreversible chemical warfare on the people of this country. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk to Bear, and we're going to be looking at the likely impact on the UK water supply.
If you take an active interest in maintaining the optimum health and well-being of yourself and your family, the New Zealand Journal of Natural Medicine is the magazine you've been waiting for. Having taken Australia and New Zealand by storm, the New Zealand Journal of Natural Medicine is now available in the UK and Europe. Visit www.nznaturalmed.co.uk or call 01626 337 531 to order your copy now.
And welcome back to part 3. And that was Brian Monk. How can you ignore the experience of a man who's living with this just 5.5, 6 years? Imagine what the UK will be like in just a few years if this industry gets a hold. What is wrong with the likes of David Cameron, George Osborne, Lord John Brown? Well, we know what is wrong. They are socio-psychopaths. They are following the instructions. They are well rewarded. They have the lifestyle, they have the money, but they are soulless. And as Brian said, anyone who thinks that the government is looking after our best interests is living in a world of delusion. Now, talking of the high-vis jackets, a few weeks ago, I engaged one of the police officers, the female police officers, in conversation after she made the observation that the protectors were not taking into account the interests of the local community. I've shown this short clip before, but I want to show it again because I had another meeting, as it were, with this police officer just a few days ago. Let's have a look at this.
Anyway. Yeah, all we're asking is for you to keep moving, that's all we're asking.
That's the point, it's our right to go at our
Absolutely, we're just asking you. It's just a reasonable request, that's all we're doing. Well, we're going to still keep asking you, aren't we?
Okay, but it won't get any
No, that's fine, but we are just asking. It's just a reasonable request.
The same thing over and over again. It's not going to happen.
As long as we keep moving, guys, that's all we're asking you to do.
Once again, how can we be creating an obstruction if we are
We're not saying that you are obstructing, we're just asking you to move, aren't we?
You're moving very fast,
Oh, we're asking you to
that's the whole point.
Yes, but you're affecting people's livelihoods, aren't you, as well?
Yeah,
they don't care about farmers.
Exactly, this is exactly what they do care about.
Exactly.
Yeah?
So if they care, then
No, have you checked what this process will do? Have you checked, ma'am? Do you realise that everywhere in the world that this process has been unleashed, it has resulted in the contamination of water and the soil? It's made agriculture impossible. Are you aware of this? Everywhere in the world.
Come on, guys, keep it moving. Okay,
So in other words, you haven't.
You can tell me anything you like, that's up to you.
Okay.
More than happy to listen
So
to
in
you.
other words, your observations and comments are effectively based on ignorance.
Absolutely not.
They were.
And based upon the fact that
No, you made the observation about protecting people's livelihoods, and that's exactly what people are here
that's
for.
fine, okay? We can just keep moving to engage in relation to that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You didn't have to say anything either.
No. Guys, what I need you to do is keep moving forwards, please, because you're actually going a lot slower.
We're moving at the speed of the people in
So,
front of us.
what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts?
And actually looked where he was walking.
What are your thoughts?
I can't even
Based on your own comments, you don't have any thoughts.
Keep it going. I don't need to tell you any of my thoughts.
About how I protest.
Guys, we're just asking to keep it moving, aren't we? Just keep going.
Stop pushing people, everybody forward.
Okay, come on, folks. Let's keep it going. Thank you.
Stop pushing into these people.
Keep walking. Thank you. Move on, please. Thank you. Walking.
Keep walking forward, please. Let's keep moving, folks. Thank you very much.
Keep walking, please.
Keep moving, please.
Walking. Thank you very much. Keep going.
Thank you.
Keep moving, please. Thank you.
Okay.
Keep walking forward, please.
Keep walking, please.
Come on, folks. Let's keep moving. Thank you.
Keep going.
Keep walking. Keep walking forward. Thank you. Keep walking.
Keep walking, please.
Moving,
Keep
please.
Keep walking. Keep walking forward, please. Keep
That's enough.
Keep walking.
Keep going.
I wonder what you're going to tell your children.
Please,
I wonder what you're going to tell your children. What are you going to tell your children? What are you going to tell your children? You're going to tell your children to carry on walking? Because that's what they're going to have to do to find fresh water.
Keep moving.
You must be very, very proud. Very proud.
With it. Keep walking.
Go around here, mate.
Okay.
Please, thank you.
Thank you.
Keep going.
There'll be vehicles coming through this way. Can you get on the side, please?
Side of the road, please, and you're
Can you move over, please?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So what do you tell your children?
Move to the side, please.
What do you tell your children? What do you tell your children? Is that what you tell your children? Move to the side?
Turn your brain off.
Have you actually looked at what this process does? Have you? No?
Just stay to the side, please.
You're not allowed to think, are you? It's sad. Very, very sad. Yeah, what do you tell your children? Yeah? What in 20 years when they can't get access to fresh water? What are you going to tell the children? That you facilitated those who were trying to protect against this happening? Yeah? You haven't even looked at it, have you? For women to be participating in this is an absolute abomination.
They're not public servants, not at all.
I hope your children will understand that you were just following orders when they can't get fresh water.
Exactly.
That's why they're bringing in new blood all the time, new meat, fresh meat. Go and search the truth behind the dash for gas. Yeah. Look at what's happened in the US, look at what's happened in Australia. Yeah, where people are being forced from their land because they can't grow crops, they can't keep livestock, they can't get fresh water. The gas companies are sucking their aquifers dry. Sorry, I'm confusing you with someone who really gives a damn. At what point in the selection process do you have the operation where the soul is removed?
Well, that's a frontal lobotomy.
There's no life in these eyes. No life. No soul. Just automatons. And the problem is you daren't have a look at it, of course, because it might just change your worldview. You might just realise that you're perpetrating a horrendous crime. Well, morning, gentlemen.
Watch your back, sir.
You good?
Watch your back. Ian, watch your back, mate.
I hope that many or some of those officers are watching tonight. So the message to Greater Manchester Police, to iGas, to Peel Holdings, to Dart, Quadrilla, Celtic, Northern, and all the other companies that nobody's yet ever heard of. The evidence is there from right across the world. There is nowhere where this process has been unleashed that has not resulted in the contamination of water, soil and air. The cities of Dallas and Fort Worth, who built their fortunes on oil exploration and production, have now outlawed the process of hydraulic fracturing within the city limits. And on Friday of last week, the city of Los Angeles outlawed hydraulic fracturing within the city limits. And of course, France, the presidential ban was upheld by the Conseil Constitutionnel on October the 11th of last year. Yet in this country, we have a government and an industry, including Total, who are bought into Dart and iGas in the East Midlands, who want to do this in this country. What is wrong with us? What is wrong with the people of this country? If a terrorist said they were going to poison our water, the media would be all over it. But when our own government wants to do it, they endorse it. Something is not right. And we have to stop it. We will stop it. Now, Bear. Bear, are you there?
Hello, Ian.
Hey, my friend, how you doing? Did you manage to catch the discussion with Brian Monk earlier?
I did, and it was heart-wrenching, to be honest. My heart really goes out to Brian, and I just say keep strength and keep the faith, because you're doing a wonderful job. But I can't begin to believe what that poor man is living with and going through, being so close to so much, such a concentrated industry as the fracking is in Queensland.
I mean, an absolute inspiration, that's for sure. Now, Bear, of course, I mean, it was very pertinent that we have this discussion with Brian today, because you're going to talk to us today about the contamination of the UK water supply.
I am, Ian, yeah. I've just been looking through a couple of studies at the moment. Groundwater is by far and large the main area that most people fear the risk of contamination. But it's also the area, as a result, I think there's been most of the studies have been done. But these studies I've been looking through, I'm only going to deal with one this week, which is it was done by Duke University by Professor Osborne in 2011, and it's titled Methane Contamination of Drinking Water Accompanying Gas Well Drilling and Hydraulic Fracturing. And so this is from 2011, just to state, so this is from a few years ago. So this information is available not only to yourself if you want to go and research, but also to the government if they'd like to do the same. But this study was done specifically in Pennsylvania and upstate New York, looking at the Utica and the Marcellus Shale, which is the main source equivalent to the Boland Shale over here. And it looked at over, I think it was, no, just under 70 drinking wells, 68 drinking wells, from a depth of about 36 to 190 metres. Now, they're estimated to be about 1 million. And when I say wells, by the way, I don't mean gas wells. I actually mean public water wells. These are private wells that supply either individuals or small communities. And as I was about to say, there's estimated to be about 1 million of these in the Pennsylvania area, but they only sampled 68. And another interesting thing about it as well is that they only these bores, these water artesian wells, only go to a depth of 190 metres. Now, this becomes pertinent with what I'll reveal, because this is far above the layer of which they're fracking in the US, and they would be fracking here in the UK. And this is something that they've said that is far above the risk zone, because it is far away from where the fracturing is actually occurring. Well, in these studies, they found 51 out of 68 wells contained methane gas. Not all of it was thermogenic methane, though. Now, I'll just do a quick explanation. I think a lot of people will start to understand the difference, but you have two types of methane, biogenic and thermogenic. The one that we're worried about is thermogenic methane. Thermogenic methane is produced from heat and pressure and time, buried. The model of, like most people understand how oil is, but is organic material that decays and is buried deep under the earth. Now, biogenic methane is created from the decay of shallow sources, so organic materials that are trapped in soil layers and in natural sediments that form around rivers and alluvial plains. Now, of these drinking wells that they sampled, they found, as I say, it was 51 out of 68. They actually studied wells that had fracking with under 1 kilometre away, and wells that didn't have fracking, wells that didn't have water wells rather that didn't have fracking wells. Sorry, I'm confusing myself here. Didn't have fracking wells close to it, and they found that on average, water wells within 1 kilometre of a fracking site, there was an increase of 17 times the amount of thermogenic methane. So that's a range of 19.2 milligrams to up to 64 milligrams per litre. Now, to give you an idea, in wells that they studied where there was no evidence of thermogenic methane, it was 1.1 milligram of methane per litre. So we're talking almost at the higher end, we're talking almost 70 times more methane in these drinking supplies.
And Bear, call it a hunch, but I'm sure that there's not too much research that has been done in the US on the exposure and usage of contaminated water over any length of time.
Not even in just the US. I don't think it's actually really been done, to be honest.
Exactly.
You know, it's a global thing. Is that one of the you've talked about cognitive dissonance. We've mentioned it before. Is that until there is a problem, the systems that we live under don't react. So until you can say that there is actually a hazard, they won't do anything about it. The problem is that if you don't do anything about it, i.e. do a study to see if there is a hazard, you're never going to know until it's too late, which is the problem that we're facing.
And of course, it's not just a question of it being too late. What we're talking about here is a process that's actually irreversible. So there's no recovery.
That's it. Well, the document I mentioned last week, the Environment Agency Underground Under Threat water protection document, that itself said that is that once a groundwater supply subsurface is polluted, it can take decades, but more realistically, centuries, millennia for it actually to clean itself. And one of the interesting things I've been looking at with the ways that these aquifers will clean themselves is through the natural bacteria processing pollutants. One thing I've been looking into is that the fracking industry use an antibacterial agent in one of their frack fluids, and I think they are planning to use this in the UK. It's what Quadrilla have listed on the website.
This is polyacrylamide.
Yeah, polyacrylamide, but they also use. I don't know. Is that the antibacterial agent itself? I thought it was a different thing. Like I can't remember the name, unfortunately, off the top of my head. But the one thing that is that the fracking industry actually is doing. What's the best way to describe it? It's actually shooting itself in the foot twice, because not only are they pumping this horrendous chemicals down there with this antibacterial agent, they're killing the bacteria in the aquifers that would mitigate the damage to a small extent anyway. So they're even destroying the natural systems with which the Earth could essentially heal itself.
Indeed. Bear, I've got a chart here that you sent over to me.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you could put that up, please, Ian, the first one.
There you go.
Yeah, just with what I've just said then, with the original saying about the distance, if you look at the plot, it's pretty obvious. You've got the non-active extraction areas, the small triangles, and the active extraction areas. And you can see the cluster, the distance to the gas well, the further you get away, the methane just drops straight away. But as the distance you get closer to it, so on the left-hand side of the graph, you can see. That itself is such telling data, because that is just a perfect example of the methane concentrations in relation to the fracking wells.
And of course, this is data that has to be acquired by a third party, because in the US, the oil and gas industry is exempt from having to acknowledge and report any contamination of water, soil or air.
Oh, well, completely, yeah, the Halliburton loophole. And also with what I was saying about the air emissions studies, whereas that they only had to declare the 20 largest sources of methane in the Unitar Valley Basin, which left 90 other compressor stations, as something that Brian mentioned earlier. And this is something pertinent to that, is that those 90 compressor stations were producing as much pollutants, air pollutants, as the main 20 sources. So immediately, this on every level, like groundwater, air pollution, everything, that is just a complete lack of transparency from the industry supported by the government.
So there's actually nothing at all, is there, really, that is endearing to this particular process or this industry?
Not at all. Everything about it's designed to be high damage, downhole, down surface, with the fracturing process itself. Then you're pumping the chemicals in. Every single facet of this industry has a problem. People have been shouting about pollutants from cars for years, but it's potential that this industry will pump out just as much, if not more, potentially pollutants. The same thing, it's almost as if people have blinkers because they see the problems that we already have, realizing that we're fighting those problems while ignoring potentially as big problems. And in fact, that it's being sold to us in the idea that this will solve our problems. I still cannot understand the turnaround from the Tories, going from the fact that we need methane, the shale gas, to breaches to the use of alternatives, and now Osborne claiming that methane is a green gas.
I know.
Well, it is a greenhouse gas, I'll give you that. It's 5 times more efficient as a greenhouse gas.
Well, ain't that the truth? And, the other factor here as well is that I think Barton Moss was very, very carefully selected because, of course, it's a moss. It's a peat moss. So there are naturally occurring biogenic methane seepage from the moss. In fact, it's a phenomenon. That's one of the reasons why the moss isn't heavily built up yet, although Peel Holdings, of course, have plans to change that in the coming years. But every year there is the risk of natural ignition of the methane, which is why the fire service have regular patrols on the Moss just to see if there's any natural combustion occurring. And my conjecture is that iGas have specifically chosen the Barton Moss site so that if there is, and there will be of course, methane seepage, they can just blame it on the natural biogenic seepage that is known to occur there.
Oh, I can totally believe that, Ian. It would, with the track record of the industry, I mean, we've talked about limited results, selective results. I mean, they're obviously going to select sites. I mean, that's something I hadn't thought of, and I do know about the peat layers there, but that sounds, that sounds exactly right, to be honest. It's one of their perfect dirty tricks.
It is, really. And of course, I think I've mentioned before, it's actually no accident that the iGas licences in the northwest follow the Manchester Ship Canal and the Mersey right across to the Irish Sea, and the bulk of that land is owned by Peel Holdings. So, this is a symbiotic relationship between iGas, Peel Holdings and local authorities that have already been identified as per this wonderful, this wonderful report here, Peel and the Liverpool City region. And I encourage people to download it. It's actually, it's a couple of years old now, but it was produced by a company called Exurbe, E-X-U-R-B-E. And this is a very comprehensive investigation into the way in which Peel has effectively established its corporate hegemony. And the term hegemony effectively means government through other channels. So in other words, it's puppeteering. It's pulling the strings of other companies or local administrations or whatever to effectively get your way. And one of the things that absolutely I hope comes out of this, and I'm going to be doing it in my public presentations, it's drawing attention to the behaviour of companies like Peel and getting people to realise that people who work in these corporations, they may be wonderful fathers, wonderful husbands, but when they get around the boardroom table, they become socio-psychopathic, and they don't give a second thought about condemning the people who live in these sacrifice zones, and that's what the industry calls them, sacrifice zones, to effectively be the guinea pigs. But I mean, they're not guinea pigs, because we know what's going to happen because it's happened everywhere else. And Brian Monk is unfortunately and tragically the living proof of what can occur in a relatively short space of time. So, Bear, how do you see that we're going to go from here in the UK?
Well, there's not going to be any fracking. I'm with you completely on that, Ian. But in the other potentials, I think more and more we're going to see anti-fracking groups springing up. I mean, it's a snowball effect at the moment, as we've mentioned, is that so many different groups are setting up around the country, and I think that something that that they said on UK Column, many other people say it. Brian said it himself. Is people need to do the research themselves. It doesn't take long. I mean, all the information that I bring forward in my talks, all of it is freely available on the internet, and it's out there if you know where to look. I've got the advantage that I actually have the idea of what sort of science I'm looking for, but I mean, what I'm planning to do eventually is, after a few more weeks, is set up an associated page with Fracking Nightmare and post up all that data. But it's out there for yourselves. Go and look. And I think that the more that people get switched on, the more that they get forewarned and forearmed and understand that this is being pushed through regardless of public consensus or public mandate, and that as soon as as more people realise the industry, the insidious nature of the industry is permeated our government and government departments like a hydra, that will be the turning point. Is when people are starting to switch on, more people are aware of it, but it's once it's exposed to that many people. And the only way that will happen as well is if people who watch this program is go out and talk. We need to talk to each other. You need to educate people. I talk to people on the bus, on the train. People may end up crying sometimes, I think, because I get very passionate about it. But go out, educate people, make them aware. I mean, stop. What I'd pray is stop using your mobile phones on public transport and start an engaging conversation. It's amazing who you can talk to, and that is how we're going to beat this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we've said many times before, what is so remarkably unique about this is that it doesn't matter what your social standing, it doesn't matter what your political views, what your philosophical views are, what your religious views are. This impacts on everybody. Those who are perpetrating this agenda, those who are culpable, like the police, in facilitating this agenda, one day you will have to explain to your children why it was that you were facilitating a process that is going to result in the contamination of the water, the soil and the atmosphere. Coming up, we have the AV5 event, Alternative View 5, which will be held in Daventry later this year on the middle weekend of May. This is going to be a unique conference. It's not going to be a conference where people just give presentations and then you leave having had a fun weekend or an informative weekend. This is going to be a weekend where you will want to go back to your communities and you will want to participate in bringing about the change that we all know we need to see. Thank you for joining us. Catch you next week. Take care.